recording is in progress. So of course, as we had a really, I thought it was a wonderful program last night. And today is the first Yahrtzeit of Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, Zecher Tzaddik Livracha. And I think it behooves us to really to study and focus on his memory. So we have to learn Ili Nishmas Rabbi Yaakov Tzvi ben David Aryeh. I actually have two parts. I want to share with you something that he wrote on this parsha, which we've been discussing, so it'll actually dovetail nicely. But before that, I want to play. I've been watching a lot of videos. It's kind of, you can never get enough. I wanted to find kind of the right one, and I found a pre-slichas address, which is fairly popular, and it's worth watching, especially in today's culture. And I'll tell you why this spoke to me. So what I mentioned is on the this is what I quoted last night. This is from the Jerusalem Post on Friday. I love, Jerusalem Post has that weekend section, has that magazine. It's really really exciting. And this, different sections. This is observations, realizing the legacy of Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. But on the bottom part of the fold, okay, there is this. I can see that. It says, it's by Oded Revivi, and it's Walking the Narrow Bridge with Rav Melamed. And I found it interesting that these were juxtaposed. Oded Revivi, by the way, is the mayor of Efrat. He's been for a long time, and he's a very engaged guy. I've met him a few times. Really interesting guy. But Rav Melamed, if you don't know Rav Melamed is the head of a yeshiva in Har Bracha. If you remember a while ago, we studied about Har Grizim and Har Eval, and we looked at it on the map, etc. So in Har Bracha, he has yeshiva, but he has written extensively. We actually teach it in between Mincha Marav every day. We study from Rav Melamed, and he has a series of svarim called Peninei Halacha. And Peninei Halacha is what somebody said to me, like in the ZT'L community, in the modern, what you would call modern Orthodox world in Israel, it's the new Mishnah Berurah. And he writes so clearly and concisely. And not only that, there are many volumes which are published in English. And the English translation is 100% spot on, which is not a small deal, because often when books are translated into English, they don't translate well, or the translators don't do a great job. This is even down to the footnotes, bidiyuk, every single nikuda is 100% accurate. So when I was there this summer, I had the opportunity to sit with him for an hour and to seek his advice on a number of topics, as he's a brilliant person. But he's the head of the ZT'L community. But what's happened is that he recently became canceled. He got canceled by his own ZT'L community. They said some rabbis who had given a haskama, and I'm not talking about like Haredi rabbis in Bnei Brak. I'm talking about a rabbi in Kiryat Arba and in other places, and Sephardic rabbis. They rescinded their haskama. Often when somebody writes a sefer, there's something called a haskama. There is an approbation or an approval, sort of like a stamp of approval saying, oh, read this book, it's good, I've seen it. And they claim they didn't like some of the things he wrote. Okay. But the real sort of backstory is that Rav Melamed has been working, and he met with conservative and reform rabbis. And because he did so, that ruffled some feathers. Now, he's just trying to bridge the gap between different types of Jews and bring all under the umbrella of Klal Yisrael, Am Yisrael, which I'm a big fan of. And he has now been in the papers. When it gets into the papers, et cetera, et cetera. I actually sent a letter through his like number one. I sent a letter of support, and he was very appreciative. And he sent a message back to me that he appreciates, hearing and the support, because it can't be easy. But he's a guy like, he's going to go, he's going to teach, he's going to do. Okay. So because of the juxtaposition of that on that, I want to share with you this clip from Rabbi Sacks, which he gave. It was a big deal. He gave obviously many great speeches, but his pre-slichos address was always considered a highlight of the year. So this is a pre-slichos address, I think, from 2019. I will now share the screen, and let's see. Do you see that? You see it on your screen? Give me a thumbs up, okay? And let's hope that we have. I'm gonna kind of full and tell me. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear it. Well, nothing's going yet, but
friends, we live in an unforgiving age. In 2015, a British scientist, Sir Tim Hunt, a Nobel Prize-winning scientist, no less, made his visit to South Korea. The only thing is, in 2015, they haven't taught the South Koreans to say shalom. On his visit 4 years ago, he made, in the course of his speech, a bad joke about women in laboratories. It was a silly joke, and he admitted it, and it fell flat. However, one person tweeted the joke, and it went round the world and became viral. And thereafter, he became the target of an online shaming campaign, the end of which was he was forced to resign his position at University College London, forced to resign his position in the Royal Society, forced to resign his position in the European Research Council, and turned into a pariah, despite the fact that he obviously was only making a joke. Immediately afterwards, in his talk, said science needs women. Despite the fact that his wife is a distinguished scientist, despite the fact that he apologized time and time again, despite the fact that he was defended by fellow scientists from Brian Cox all the way to His Holiness Richard Dawkins, the truth is, they were telling the world it was only a joke. And yet he was condemned without trial, without consideration of the evidence, without due process, without appeal, without mercy, without regard to his lifetime of service to science, without regard to the simple fact that he was a human being and human beings make mistakes. Ours is an unforgiving age. Jordan Peterson is a psychologist at the University of Toronto. He is probably the most followed public intellectual in the world right now. He has a huge following because he's a countercultural figure and he has the courage to challenge some politically correct positions. This summer, he was due to serve as a research fellow in the Cambridge Divinity School, which your rabbi knows well because he has been teaching there and will do so until the 30th of September this month, when he may lose his position because of what I'm about to say. But I'm sorry in advance, okay? Somebody discovered somewhere on Facebook that somebody unknown had taken a selfie with Jordan Peterson. And the somebody who took the selfie was wearing a t-shirt with a slogan on it that was not terribly nice. Now, hundreds of people on that night that Jordan Peterson gave a lecture wanted a selfie with him. Hundreds of people took a selfie with him. He had no chance of scrutinizing what the people who were taking selfies with him were wearing. He had no idea what was written on the t-shirt, and yet he was condemned. Who was he condemned by? The Cambridge Divinity School. Let me ask you, Michael Harris, have they heard of the word forgiveness in the Cambridge Divinity School? Or is that too recherche? Or maybe they've heard of the word justice. Here is a man condemned because of somebody else's selfie with him, somebody else's t-shirt, with no trial, no evidence, no judicial process, no reflective moral judgment, no v'darashta v'chakata v'sha'alta heitev, as the Torah tells us to do, to examine the evidence well and see if hinei emet nachon hadavar, if the thing is true. None of that. Just simple condemnation. Now, I happen to have the privilege of knowing Jordan Peterson. I went to interview him at his home in Toronto. And we had a long conversation together, which you can hear in its entirety on the BBC website. Here is a serious human being, a man whose work is intensely moral, deeply spiritual, intellectually challenging. A person who is focused on what we are going to focus on tonight and for the next few days until Yom Kippur, the focus on taking responsibility for your life, not blaming other people, but taking responsibility. That's what slichot are about. And yet nothing was said in his defense, not even from a faculty of divinity. Ours is an unforgiving age. So here was a man who made a slightly ill-judged joke, and here was a man who had the misfortune to have a selfie taken together with somebody wearing an inappropriate t-shirt. And these were the people for whom, in Maimonides' words, the gates of repentance were closed. Nobody gave them a chance to say, I'm sorry, or to explain, or to forgive, be forgiven. Nothing. And now consider two people who actually did wrong. Wrong so bad that we would understand if somebody said what they did was unforgivable. I think, first of all, of a young man who said these words, Ma betza ki naharog et achin. What profit will we get if we kill our brother? Come, let's sell him as a slave. Let's not kill him. After all, he's our brother, our own flesh and blood, who sold his brother as a slave. His name was Yehuda. That was a real sin. And yet he became the ancestor of Israel's kings. He became a lot more than that. We bear his name. We are called Jews because we are Yehudim, because we are named after Yehuda. Why? Because he was forgiven. And why was he forgiven? Because he owned up. He said, Aval Hashem anachnu, we were guilty. He said in words we're going to say in Slichus soon, what can we say to justify ourselves? He said, God has uncovered our guilt. What's more, he changed. From the person who sold his brother as a slave, he became the person who was willing to spend the rest of his life as a slave so that his brother Benjamin could go free. He became a Baal Tshuva. Joseph, his brother, forgave him. God forgave him. And it is his name we bear. Let me give you a second example. And here I talk about a king of Israel whose behavior was, well, how can I put it? In the immortal words of the late Leonard Cohen. Your faith was strong, but you needed proof. You saw her bathing on the roof. Her beauty and the moonlight overthrew you. I hope that doesn't need any Russian Tosfos to read it. The king of Israel who had adulterous relationship with somebody else's wife and then sent her husband to the front line of the army. This was a horrendous sin. It was an appalling crime. And yet he became Israel's greatest king. More than that, he became perhaps the greatest religious poet the world has ever known. Why? Because he was forgiven. And why was he forgiven? Because he said, in the shortest form of slichot ever delivered, in one word, chatati, I sinned. But he didn't just say that. He said, chatati negdi tamid. My sin is in front of me all the time. I will never for 1 minute forget that I sinned. And so he was forgiven. So Judah and King David were Balei Tshuva, who confessed and apologized, and they changed, and they were forgiven. And they'd committed serious wrongs, not jokes in bad taste or t-shirts in a selfie. And yet they were forgiven. Imagine they hadn't been forgiven. If Yehuda hadn't been forgiven, there would be no Jews today. Because it was Yehuda who survived when the 10 tribes in the north disappeared from history, the lost 10 tribes. If King David hadn't been forgiven, there would be no book of Psalms today, and the whole world would be impoverished. What's the difference? The difference is because at the heart of our faith is a God who forgives. Vayoma Hashem salachti kidvarecha. God says to us, be honest with me, and then I will forgive you. And then he says to us, as we'll say over and over again tonight and throughout Slichot, Hashem, Hashem kerachum v'chanun. God is a God of mercy and compassion. And when did he say those words? After the worst sin of all, the golden calf. 40 days after receiving the Torah on Mount Sinai, the worst sin of all, and God forgave. God forgives. What happens when an entire culture loses faith in God? I'll tell you, all that's left is an unconscious universe of impersonal forces that doesn't care if we exist or not. And in the other direction, all that's left is a world of Facebook and Twitter and viral videos in which anyone can pass judgment on anyone without regard to the facts or truth or reflective moral judgment. And by the time the person accused has had the chance to explain or the truth has emerged, the crowd has already moved on. They're not interested anymore. And what happens in an unforgiving culture? In an unforgiving culture, the people who survive and thrive are the people without shame. Have a look at who is powerful in the world today. And they are the people without shame. Because those are the only people who survive in a world without forgiveness. Whereas we believe that God gives us a chance to acknowledge our mistakes. And where, if we are honest about the wrong we have done, if tonight we stand before HaKadosh Baruch Hu with a broken heart, if we are willing to have the guts to say, Aval Hashemim anachnu, we really did get it wrong, if we are able to say, like David HaMelech, Chatati, I sinned, then God gives us a second chance. And that is what Slichot are all about being honest, about being candid, about saying, Rabbanu Shalom, I know I let you down. I know I let others down. I know I let me down. But Shema Koli, Shema Kolenu. Listen to me, Rabbanu Shalom. Hear my cry. Help me become the person you created me to be. A year or two ago, I was just about to give a lecture in a big shul in America. 1,000 people in the audience. And to get 1,000 Jews to sit down, hard as the division of the Red Sea is, you know. So we had a certain weight in front of us. And the rabbi of the shul, very sweet man, said to me, Rabbi Sachs, do you mind, we've got 10 minutes before we have to begin. Every week I do a radio program, the local Jewish radio program, and we've got 10 minutes. Would you do an interview with me? So I said, fine. So we went into his study, just the two of us. And this is what he asked me. He said, Rabbi Sachs, I look at your CV. I look at your career. Tell me, Rabbi Sachs, did you ever fail at anything? I almost fell out of my chair laughing. I said, I have failed at almost everything. My favorite sentence in the English language is Winston Churchill's definition of success. You know his definition of success? Going from failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm. So I tried to explain to the rabbi, the real difference is not between failure and success. The real difference is between failing and giving up and failing and keeping on going. That's the real difference in life. And what keeps me going, I explained to him, is the simple knowledge that God lifts us when we fall, and God forgives us when we fail. So I have one request of you. Forget the public persona of perfection that people post on their social media as their defense against an unforgiving world. Forget it. And know in our davening that in the inner reaches of our soul, we can be honest with ourselves. We can acknowledge the ways in which we failed and fell short because we know that God forgives. And in that forgiveness, God gives us the strength to heal what we have harmed, to mend what we have broken, and to become the person he wants us to be. May Hashem give us that strength. Kenya Yahrtzeit v'namah. Amen.
All right, so you don't need my commentary on that, but that's pretty amazing. Imagine if we had that in our like a pre-slichos speech. So that's unbelievable, and it's so pertinent today because we live in this sort of cancel culture and society where if you make one misstep, then you're done for good. A lot of people would benefit from hearing that and from certainly from learning from his lessons. Before I get to the parsha aspect, it's I want to share with you again, to show how sort of present he was and is. I mean, of course, it's the week of the Yahrtzeit, so two other publications that I came across where just print publications, where not online, talking about Rabbi Sachs. So I regularly subscribe to the I don't know if you know this magazine, the Jerusalem Report, which has a lot of interesting articles from all sides of the spectrum. It's important to, by the way, see all sides of the spectrum, particularly when it comes to Israel. And this is a viewpoint by Paul Sakin, who is a distinguished professor emeritus and founder of Jewish Studies program at the University of Waterloo. I don't know where the University of Waterloo is. All I think of is the Mamma Mia song, Waterloo, but okay. Try not to sing it in your head right now. And here writing about, and he says, talking about the trouble with the secular world, but I want to just give you one tidbit from Rabbi Sachs that he shares. The theology of religion is based on belief in God, but is every bit as much about us. Rabbi Sachs writes about his own understanding of Judaism. We think that religion is about faith in God. What I had not fully understood before was that faith in God should lead us to have faith in people. For God's image is in each of us, and we have to learn how to discern it. And that's one thing that we've lost. We've lost faith in people. And kind of echoing this, so also if you ever daven in sort of a shul in Israel with Americans in it, or people English Anglo speakers, so they always give out this publication, the Torah Tidbits, which is remarkable, by the way. This is 63 pages. I mean, mostly ads, but advertisements for different shiurim and lectures you can go to, and educational opportunities and tours, etc. So this was a remembrance of Rabbi Sachs by a fellow named Benji Singer. And Benji Singer is a teacher and a freelance writer, and he runs something called IsraelB.org, which talks about lots of different events taking place in and around Israel. And this is something that I had mentioned last night. And the successful education is nurturing and maintaining positive relationships. Education is about relationships. Yes, we teach text, laws, and history, but we will only make a difference to the lives of our young people if we are connecting with them. What we teach our students is the means. The end is developing relationships with them. Hopefully, then we stand a chance of making an impact and imparting our values and ideas. And again, so you see, like with the clips we saw last night and tonight, they all flow together. If we live in this sort of online existence, then you don't have connection with people. And no matter how, and social media is probably the least social thing that exists in this world. I always think of this great meme. I have to dig it up somewhere, but they show a picture of a casket in a funeral home, and all the chairs except for two are empty. So you have this big funeral home, and there's only two people there, and one in the cartoon bubble, it says, one says the other, but he had so many friends on Facebook. So that's kind of the world we live in. So that's why this sort of learning and text, everything, but it's there to connect us together, which then brings me to our parsha of Chayei. So Chayei, and it's really a lot of it leading up to it. And if we'll look at some of the text. So we can, we could jump around in Lech Lecha and in Vayera. Much of it we know already because we've covered it in the last few weeks. But in the beginning of Lech Lecha, God promises Avraham, and he says, I'm going to give this land, which we saw. And then after he separated from Lot, God says to Avraham, okay, you have this land. He's separated. Go look, and you're going to see. I'm going to give you, go walk this way, that way. Go walk the whole breadth of the land. You're going to see it. And then he tells him again, I'm the God that took you out of Ur Kasdim. Here's the land. You're going to take possession of it. Okay. And then we had, in the end of the parasha, we had the bris bein habesarim, the covenant between the halves. And God says, you're going to have the land. It's from the Har Paras, from the Euphrates, and you're going to have the Kenizis and the Canaanites, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we have the sort of in the end of this whole leading up to, in Parashas Lech Lecha, Hashem says to Abraham, he says, and I will uphold my covenant between me and you and your offspring. What's the covenant? I will give it to you and to your offspring, all the land of your sojourns, the whole land of Canaan, as an everlasting possession, and I will be a God to them. So that's one promise that God gives him. The second promise that God gives him, of course, is that goes hand in hand with land, is he's going to have a big family. He's going to have descendants. You're going to be a great name, and through you will be a blessing, or etc. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth. You know, we always have this question. You know, it probably, if you would ask yourself in the course of history, what was the greatest? I mean, you could probably look this up and have some relatively accurate statistic, but what was the greatest number of Jews that ever existed in the world at one time? You know, I don't think it was ever more than 20 million. You know, now I think we're hovering at 12, 13 million. We're trying to get back the numbers that were lost, that were taken from us. But probably the height, 18 to 20 million, maybe. So it's not the sand of the stars, and it's not, the so many. So what is the meaning of that promise? So Chazal have taught us that, if you would ask the average person that has never met Jews, and I don't know if this has ever happened to you, have you ever been somewhere where someone has never met a Jew before? I've had this experience, traveling in the South, and they actually asked if they could take my kippah off to see my horns. And I remember the first time hearing that, I'm thinking like, yeah, I don't know what you're talking about, and it's a obviously Michelangelo, but it's a play on the words, because it says that when Moshe Rabbeinu came down, it says ki koran or panav, that his face was beaming. They had to wear a mask because his face was beaming. But the word koran is the same as keren, which means horn. And that's the, kind of the misuse of the word. However, so imagine if you would ask somebody who never met a Jew before and ask about the Jews, and you wonder why there's anti-Semitism in the world, and he asked him, how many Jews do you think there are in the world? And they'd say, there's got to be 1 billion of them. I don't know, because, they control Hollywood, and they control the banks, and and the Nobel Prize, they go on and on and on. So you may not have the physical numbers, but you will have the influence of so many, which indeed has absolutely proven true. And Hashem continues, and he says, he takes him outside, and he says, look up at the stars, et cetera, et cetera. And at the end of the parsha, again, he says, Hine brisi dech vayisel av hamon goyim. He changes his name from Avram to Avraham, because you're going to be Av Hamon Goyim, the father of many nations. And as we get to the end of the Akedah, at the end of last week's parsha, Hashem says to him, after that whole debacle, which, we could spend time talking about the PTSD that Yitzchak Avinu had, which is probably severe. But there he says to Avraham, Kivarech avarechecha v'harba arbe zaracha k'chochvei hashemayim v'chachol hashal svas hayam v'yirash zaracha eis sha'ar oivav. He says, and I will surely bless you and greatly increase your offspring like the stars in the heavens, like the sand and the seashore, and your offspring will inherit the gate of its enemy. And the nations of the earth will bless themselves by your offspring, because you have listened to my voice. 5 times each promise. 5 times he was promised land. 5 times he was promised offspring. Brings us to the beginning of Parshas Chayei. And Chayei has 2 distinct portions to it. The first portion is the death of Sarah Imenu, where, and depending on what version you want to look at, or there are different opinions in the Mefarshim, but I think the juxtaposition is deliberate. There's no avoiding that she dies immediately after the story of the Akedah. And by the way, when it says that after Avraham left the Akedah, Yitzchak was not with him. He went with the boys, but Yitzchak was somewhere else. I know he was learning in yeshiva. It was Ben Azman, and I go, well, fine, and he went back. Okay, fine. And right away, we're told that she dies. So Rashi teaches us, and others say that when she heard about what happened at the Akedah, she died. Before she had the chance to be told, oh, he didn't kill him. But, I don't know which would have been worse. That if if she found out that he didn't kill him, when Avraham would have come home, Avraham would have been the dead one, right? You can imagine, like, what would she like? Her only son, she's been waiting for so long. And then the Torah goes to great detail with this back and forth, the handling, the bargaining, the working with Ephron Hachiti to buy Ma'aras HaMachpelah, which is in Hebron. Now, sadly, and our enemies know this, by the way, they know that the places that are the most dear to us are the ones that they want to take control of. So it's very hard to visit Ma'aras HaMachpelah. It's very hard to visit Kever Rachel. It's very hard to visit Kever Yosef, which is in Shechem. They know, and then, the holiest place that we have, Har Habayit, the Temple Mount, we can't just go there, because of some deal that was made in 1967, which is whatever. Although it's getting a little bit easier, more and more people are able to go up there and even to have some sort of prayer, which is an interesting innovation that's taken place over the last couple of years. So that's a discussion for another time. In the modern Zionist yeshivas today, that's the most hotly debated topic is in halacha, is whether or not one can go to Har Habayis. Can you go up on the Temple Mount? And if you can, where can you go? How do you go? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's worth reading about. By the way, also in the cover story in the second section of that Jerusalem Post this week was about a story about Har Habayis. You can read it online about the sort of the evolving process of the ability to pray on the Temple Mount. So he goes and Hebron. I don't know how many people here have been to Hebron, to Ma'aras HaMachpelah, like recently. Have you been recently? So, right, it's I when we go to Israel, we usually go every time. I have a different view on these things, and I kind of just go, and it's a holy place. But and of course, this Shabbos, Chayei is these Shabbos. That's in thousands and thousands of people descend on Hebron and Kiryat Arba, obviously because of what happens in the Parsha. And he goes, and he has to go, and it says by the end of the first Aliyah that he pairs Over La Socher. Ephron, he makes like, oh, you're my best friend. Don't worry, price is not an issue. Money's not an object. No problem. We'll make a deal. It's great. And in the end, he ends up paying through the nose. Okay. If I put, I have the source in front of me. I'm always fond of this stat. This is the purple chumash, as you know, the Aryeh Kaplan chumash, and he has this great note at the bottom, if I recall correctly, which is becoming harder and harder these days for me to recall things correctly. That's just because, I made fun of, we had a kiddush in shul and a surprise thing for Gary Berger, who turned 50. So I, of course, made fun of him because he's like a few months ahead of me. And that day when I came home after Shabbos, I opened up the mail and the first thing in the mail was an invitation to join AARP. And I'm thinking like, see what you get? Karma, man. Anyway, so it says that he buys Abraham, he weighed out for Ephraim the silver that had been mentioned in the presents, 400 shekels in negotiable currency. Now, 400 shekel, what's 400 shekel? Now, it's not new Israeli shekel. 400 shekel can get you from Yerushalayim to the airport, in a taxi or something like that. So the shekel is a unit of weight equal to 22.8 grams or 0.8 ounces. A silver shekel was therefore a little smaller than a silver dollar and worth around $1. Avraham therefore paid 20 pounds of silver, or about $400 for the cave. Okay. By the way, taka, good deal. Taka mitzvah. Considering land values at the time, this was highly excessive. Thus, for example, King Omri paid only 6,000 shekels for the entire territory of Samaria, which is found in Malachim Aleph, and Yirmiyahu paid only 17 shekels for a property that's at least as large as Machpelah Field in Yirmiyahu. For comparison, according to the Hammurabi code of that time, a year's wage for a working man was between 6 and 8 shekels. So to put that in perspective, if a yearly wage is 6 to 8 shekels and he's paying 400, and that's, first of all, to show you how wealthy he was, but also how willing he was. But he has to jump through hoops to get the land and to buy this ancestral burial place. The next chapter 24, which is one of the only longest uninterrupted parshios, meaning without a parsha break in the Chumash. And the story, it takes up, it's this chapter has in it 67 verses, which is the bulk of the parsha, which is where Avraham now has to go and find a wife for Yitzchak. Okay, he has to go, and he goes and he tells Eliezer, and the story is told, and it's repeated again. So it's actually 3 times, 3 different versions of the same story are told: when he was instructed, when he went, and when he was telling over the story. Eliezer was, and he goes. And by the way, the fact that Yitzchak is not involved in this, a lot we could talk about there, and Rivka and the family she's marrying into, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Fine. So 67 verses are spent talking about finding a wife for Yitzchak. So here we are. Avram Avinu, he just goes through his 10 tests. And by the way, not everybody agrees how you ended that the Akedah was the 10th test. There's an opinion in Rishonim that says that the 10th test was actually buying the land in Israel, that Israel is always going to be a test for us, which is an eternal lesson. But what happens in the end of the 10th test of the Akedah? Avram's standing there. He has one son. His other son he has sent away. He won't see him again, or there's a medrash that says that he tries to see him again, which is an interesting story. But he has his one son who he leaves the Akedah without his son. He goes home only to find that his beloved wife has died. So here he is in the land of Israel. He has no place. He has to go and handle. He has to buy land. He has no descendants. God has promised him, you're going to have all this land. God has promised him, you're going to have all these children. And what does he have to show for it right now? He has absolutely nothing. You'll hear a brilliant, if anybody's going to be in our shul, the Shabbos, you'll hear a brilliant bar mitzvah speech from Ashton Halpern, much covering this question. But I'll share with you Rabbi Sax's tremendous insight. And this is a lesson for all time. They tell a difficult story. He says, yes, Abraham will have a land. He'll have countless children, but they will not happen soon or suddenly or easily, nor will they occur without human effort. To the contrary, only the most focused willpower and determination will bring them about. The divine promise is not what it first seemed, a statement that God will act. It is in fact a request. It's an invitation from God to Abraham and his children that they should act. But not, God will help them. The outcome will be what God said it would be, but not without total commitment from Abraham's family against what will sometimes seem to be insuperable obstacles. First of all, that he could use his words like insuperable is great. A land, Israel, children, Jewish continuity. The astonishing fact is that today, 4,000 years later, they remain the dominant concerns of Jews throughout the world. The safety and security of Israel as the Jewish home and the future of the Jewish people. Abraham's hopes and fears are ours. Now as then, the divine promise doesn't mean that we can leave the future to God. That idea has no place in the imaginative world of the first book of the Torah. On the contrary, the covenant is God's challenge to us, not ours to God. The meaning of the events of Chayei is that Abraham realized that God was depending on him. Faith doesn't mean being passive. It means the courage to act and never be deterred. The future will happen, but it is we, inspired, empowered, given strength by the promise, who must bring it about. That's the lesson. So you see, like, it's 2 short stories, long drawn out stories, but that is the foundation of who we are and what we do. Is that, they say God only helps those who help themselves. That's exactly the point. We have promises, but you can't sit back and just wait for God to deliver on his promise. You can't, it's, and every single Jewish story and Jewish joke in the world, and I sent you the helicopter and I sent you the boat, I said, blah, 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 on and on and on and on. It's all about, we have to act. We have to show our part. And if we go and then we say that they're mida keneged mida, and the way that you act is the way that God judges you. You make a step towards God, God will make a step towards you. You make a step away from God, God will take a step away from you. And that's what the community of faith is about. And I'm trying to weave in, like, I tried to count how many Rabbi Sachs books I have. I think I'm over 20 for sure. The whole covenant conversation, by the way, is a 10-book set now. There's the 5 books on the Torah, and then there's about ethics and life-changing ideas. And plus the Sachs Foundation just published a new book, which I think is only available in the UK. You can get it online. But my favorite book is this one, which we've looked at before. It's a cute little book. Very hard to find. It's called Celebrating Life, and these are based on his columns that he wrote in the paper and that were on the radio. And the line is, and I have it marked off here again, talking because again, all of his ideas, they could all be interwoven, but they're so powerful because we need to hear them because we live in an age of uncertainty and an age of doubt. We're not really sure of ourselves. Faith is not certainty. It is the courage to live with uncertainty. It is not knowing all the answers. It is often the strength to live with the questions. It is not a sense of invulnerability. It's the knowledge that we are utterly vulnerable, but that is precisely in our vulnerability that we reach out to God. And through this, we learn to reach out to others, able to understand their fears and doubts. We learn to share, and in sharing, discover the road to freedom. It is only because we are not gods that we are able to discover God. I'll give you an example is that, sometimes when somebody's going through a difficult situation, specific challenge in life, let's say somebody's going through a health crisis, lo aleinu, the people that will help them the most are those that have been through similar health crises, because you can relate. And when you can find someone who can relate to what it is that you're going through, that eases your burden, and it makes you say, you know what, you get me, you understand what I'm going through. You may not have all the answers, but at least we can share that burden together. And when you share a burden, it lightens it for both parties. And that's part of the human connection, again, which has been so hard about even this, like teaching on Zoom. It's so impersonal. I don't care for it at all. I find it actually to be more tiring. For some reason, it's exhausting. But I miss kind of like the visual cues and being together, and being able to pick on Vivian in person. Soon enough, we'll be there. But that's part of this whole what humanity wants, and that's certainly what the Torah wants from us. This is, again, I'm just scratching the surface, because I would recommend that everyone should if you don't already have any of Rabbi Sacks's books, and I would recommend, at least for the Shabbos table, get either Covenant Conversation or get Judaism's Life-Changing Ideas. It's short pieces on every parsha, but with a real question and a thought to say, this is what the life-changing idea is in this parsha. It will change your life. It will change the tenor of your Shabbos table. It will change how you interact with your family. It will change how you look at other people. It will change when you hear things about having faith, when you have a crisis and you could turn to Rabbi Sacks, who's still with us. He's very much with us, by the way. That's the beauty, is that, he's going to live forever because we share his Torah. And when we do that, somebody like that lives forever and ever and ever. So we hope that, in the zechus of our learning, that Rabbi Yaakov Tzvi ben David Aryeh, that is Neshama should have an aliyah. He should continue to inspire all of us and all of Klal Yisrael. And by the way, the world at large. Look at the tributes that are coming in from the Prime Minister, from Prince Charles, et cetera, et cetera. The influence that he had on so many. And as I mentioned last night, there's very few opportunities you have in your life to meet one individual who has changed the whole world. I've had the privilege to meet two such people, and maybe more, but it's really something that we have to take note of. We have to be inspired by, and we have to continue sharing that gift with others. So I know this is slightly different from the way we normally learn, but I think today certainly calls for it, given it's the Yahrtzeit. And I hope everybody stays dry. Maybe looks like it stopped raining for a second, but I didn't want anybody to make it a schlep out today. It was kind of a miserable day. I hope everybody has a wonderful, wonderful day, and we will see you all very soon. Take care.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank